Hello everyone and welcome to the final day of the Skilling Open. This is the second match between Wesley and Magnus Carlsen. The first match ended in a draw. For those of you who maybe weren't following, the games ended by White winning every single game. So Magnus won two of his games with White and Wesley also, and now we have the second day. But it's not like the games were one-sided. The games were completely crazy and anything could have happened. And now we'll see what happens in day two. Will they again have a draw after 4 games, and will we see tie breaks, or will we have a decision already in the first 4 games? And also today's Carlsen's birthday, so he usually plays very well on his birthday, but we'll see what happens this year. So Wesley has the white pieces and he opens with e4, and Magnus already surprises him on the first move by going c6. He chooses the Caro-Kann defense, and Wesley probably was not all that prepared for that, as it took him some time to decide on a reply here. And after a few seconds, sorry about that, he went d4. So d4 by Wesley, we have d5 and e5, the advanced variation of the Caro-Kann, bishop to f5, and now knight to d2. We have e6, closing this setup after the bishop has been developed, and now shifting the knight over to b3, as the d4 pawn will be nicely defended. We have knight to d7 by Magnus, and knight to f3. We have h6, and now bishop to e2. So at this point, both players were playing relatively fast. We have a5 and a4. And here, interestingly, this position has been reached in one game in the database in 2011, Milan Baher versus Marijan Kristovic in Zagreb Open, where c5 has been played and black was able to win that game. However, here bishop to b4 check is played by Magnus, and it is already as of move 8 that we have a completely new game. And what happens now is really awesome, because Wesley replies with c3. He creates this wonderful setup, attacks Carlsen's dark square bishop, and Magnus just retreats it all the way back to f8. So everyone was very much surprised to see this, because it's like he gave Wesley a free move, but we'll see what happens. So here Wesley castles, and now knight to e7. So here during the official broadcast, they thought that maybe Carlsen was doing this funny maneuver just to wait Wesley to castle and then start pushing on the king side. But we'll see what happens here. So h3 by Wesley, and now bishop back to h7. We have bishop to d2 by Wesley, and now queen to b6, developing the queen, putting pressure on the knight if the white queen moves, and now knight to e1, preparing this f4 push, and here knight to f5 by Magnus. So this is an excellent outpost for the knight. If you want to kick it away, you either have to push it with the g4, which means weakening your king, or maybe give up the light square bishop, which is not very likely. So here bishop to d3, putting the bishop on this diagonal, but not interested in the knight. So bishop to e7, and now queen to c2. Here setting a little trap for Magnus, because if he decides to castle kingside, then g4 just wins the game on the spot, because you either lose the knight or you move the knight and then you lose the bishop with check, because there's now a double attack here. So of course Magnus did not castle. He plays bishop to g6, and now c4 by Wesley. And here we have something very interesting. D captures on c4, we have queen captures on c4, and now feel free to pause the video and try to find the absolute best move here while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on finding a move that's not very easy to find, which Magnus also played. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's knight captures on d4, and this is just a really wild move, because whatever white plays, black will always come out on top. For example, if you go for the bishop on g6, then it's a really funky line. Knight captures on b3, attacks the rook and the bishop here, but now queen captures on e6. You cannot capture the queen because the king would be in check. So here black would just castle queenside. Now there's the threat of capturing the queen, and after you capture on f7, let's say now comes knight captures on d2. You don't want to capture the rook, because white queen will capture the bishop. So you're going to capture the bishop and only then capture the rook. So queen captures, knight captures, and then after king captures, we would have this position where black would have the upper hand, as he would have to, he would be up the exchange, a rook for a bishop. So that's what happens if you capture on g6. Another option instead of capturing on g6 is to play knight captures on d4, but this is also very tricky, because here Magnus would have knight captures on e5, so attacking both of these pieces, and the bishop would be attacked twice. And after the queen moves, you just trade, captures, captures, and now bishop captures, or knight captures for that matter, captures and captures. And now we get this position where Magnus is up 2 pawns, and it would be very, very difficult for white to save this. So a lot was needed, you know, to be calculated here after Magnus played knight captures on d4. But Wesley played the absolute best move. Queen captures on d4, so now he offers a queen trade, but also leaves his knight undefended, and Magnus just goes for it. Queen captures on b3. Bishop captures on g6, at least he's gonna double up black's pawns, because he's now down a pawn. F captures, and now queen e4. Makes sense as you go after the g pawn, and here probably best is to guard the pawn with the king to f7, but Magnus castled instead and allowed Wesley a very sneaky idea. Bishop captures on h6, and this is just crazy. If Magnus accepts the bishop sacrifice, then it's just a perpetual, or even more, because after this check, king h8, queen captures on h6 check. King g8, white actually has rook to c1 with the threat of rook c3 followed by rook to g3, which would be deadly. So a very sneaky idea by Wesley, but Magnus finds the absolute best defense, rook to f5, and now the queen no longer has access to the g6 square, and now the bishop must retreat. So bishop back to e3, and now comes queen to d5, offering a queen trade, or you move and then the e5 pawn falls. So here Wesley instead trades. We have captures, captures, and now f4, saving the pawn here, but only momentarily, as Magnus immediately attacks it with the g5. He wants to mess up white's pawn structure. We have e6 here, challenging the knight, and now knight to c5. So this pawn is now hanging, and now g4. Now the rook has to move, and here Wesley, of course, is hoping Magnus will move the rook and then push the pawn all the way to f5, creating this beautiful pawn chain. But Magnus has something else in mind. He plays g captures on f4, and he sacrifices the exchange. So here g captures on f5, f captures on e3, creating this beautiful pass pawn, but the other, the d pawn is also a pass pawn, so we will have two connected pass pawns in the center. And now rook to f4, preventing this pawn from being pushed, but now bishop to f6. Magnus now prepares to push it. Knight to c2, going after the pawn here, but now just e2. We have rook to f2 going after the pawn, and now Magnus plays d4. And now, not much to do here. d3 is coming, followed by d2, so what can you do here? Wesley decides to give back some material. He plays rook captures on e2, just to get rid of those pass pawns, but now d3. And okay, rook d2, we have captures, captures, and now not even reacting to this knight being under attack, just playing rook to d8, as if the knight is captured, just bishop d4 check picks up that rook. So here, after rook to d8, we have rook to e1, and we have this endgame where Wesley has two rooks, but Magnus has a rook, a knight, and a bishop. So two pieces for the rook, which is of course much better. However, Wesley still has this pass pawn, so Magnus does need to be a little bit careful. So first, knight captures on a4, and now Wesley switches the knight back to the a file. Rook to a1, knight captures on b2 now, and rook captures on a5. So now Magnus also with the two connected pass pawns on the king side. Knight back to d3, and now king h2. We have knight to b4, challenging the rook here, and rook to c1. And here, knight to d5. The knight is nicely defended and on a nice central square here. Rook to a7 going after the pawn here, but now rook to b8. And now Magnus is ready to push those pawns. We have king to g3, and now knight to e7 going after the f5 pawn, king g4, and now b5. Now finally starts pushing those pawns. Rook to d1, and now b4. Magnus says there's no threat here. We have rook a to d7, now hoping to trade off a pair of rooks, but just b3. Magnus says nothing is really happening here. We have rook d8 check. Magnus trades once, captures, captures, and now king to h7. And here rook to b8. Of course, you have to put the rook behind the pass pawn, but b2. And this pawn is now nicely protected by the bishop. Wesley's pawns can't really move. So here Wesley played one more move, king f4. And now after knight to d5 check, it was in this position that Wesley so resigned the game, as there is not much hope for this for his king, because, well, everything loses here. There's just nothing to do. Black will just push this pawn and win the game easily. Or there are even tricks like king to e4, and then you can even bring a queen into the game, because after the rook captures it, knight c3 check, and then you just win the rook, and now you're up 2 pieces. So whatever Wesley plays here is winning for Magnus, so resigning makes sense, and like I said, it was in this position that Wesley so resigned the game. So an excellent victory for Magnus on his birthday in the first game of their second match. We'll see what happens in the other 3 matches, and will Wesley be able to bounce back and get back so we can see some tie breaks, or will Magnus just take it all the way in the first 4 games? That's the game. I do hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank Michael Calbera, Paul Muller, Sivan Salem, Brian Malsted, and Joseph Gilbert for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of this wonderful tournament, the Skilling Open, checking up on your wonderful suggestions, and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.